Objective: to study about human respiratory system, respiration. Respiration involves the following steps. 1. Breathing or ventilation, by which atmospheric air is drawn in and CO2-rich alveolar air is released out. 2. Diffusion of gases, O2 and CO2, across the alveolar membrane. 3. Transport of gases by the blood between the lungs and tissues. 4. Diffusion of gases, O2 and CO2, between the blood and tissues. 5. Utilization of O2 by the cells for catabolic reactions and the production of ATP, CO2 and H2O, cellular respiration. Mechanism of respiration. Breathing or ventilation is the means by which atmospheric air is taken to the respiratory surface for gaseous exchange. The movement of air into and out of the lungs is carried out by creating a pressure gradient between the lungs and the atmospheric air. Human beings exhibit negative pressure breathing as inspiration occurs when the intrapulmonary pressure, that is, the pressure in the lungs, is less than the atmospheric pressure. Expiration occurs when the intrapulmonary pressure is higher than the atmospheric pressure. Breathing involves the muscles of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles. The diaphragm is a C-shaped, dome-shaped structure of skeletal muscles and fibrous tissue that separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. The dome curves upwards and the superior surface forms the floor of the thoracic cavity. Radial muscles, called as phrenic muscles, are present in the diaphragm. By the contraction of these muscles during inspiration, the diaphragm becomes flattened, increasing the size of the thoracic cavity. The intercostal muscles are the muscles present between the successive ribs. These are of two types: external intercostal muscles, EICM, and internal intercostal muscles, IICM. By the contraction of the EICM, the sternum and ribs are raised upward and forward, thus increasing the size of the thoracic cavity. By the relaxation of the EICM, the sternum and ribs are moved downward and backward, thus decreasing the size of the thoracic cavity. Inspiration. Taking of atmospheric air into the lungs is known as inspiration. It takes 0.2 seconds. It is an active process as it takes place by the contraction of the muscles of the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles. Contraction of the phrenic muscles of the diaphragm makes the diaphragm flat, and this increases the volume of the thoracic chamber in the anterior-posterior axis, whereas contraction of the external intercostal muscles increases it in the dorsoventral axis. The overall increase in the thoracic volume causes a similar increase in the pulmonary volume and decreases the intrapulmonary pressure. As the intrapulmonary pressure becomes lesser than the atmospheric pressure, air from the outside rushes into the lungs. Expiration. Release of alveolar air to the outside is known as expiration. It takes 0.3 seconds. It is a passive process as it takes place by the relaxation of the muscles of the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles. Relaxation of the muscles of the diaphragm causes it to return to its normal shape and position, and this decreases the thoracic cavity in the anterior-posterior axis, whereas the relaxation of the external intercostal muscles decreases it in the dorsoventral axis. The overall decrease in the thoracic volume causes a similar decrease in the pulmonary volume and increase in intrapulmonary pressure. As the intrapulmonary pressure becomes more than the atmospheric pressure, air is released from the lungs. A normal healthy adult breathes 12 to 16 times per minute at rest. We have the ability to increase the strength of inspiration, forceful inspiration, an active process, by the contraction of certain accessory inspiratory muscles like the sternocleidomastoid, scalene muscles, and pectoralis muscles. Forceful expiration, an active process, is achieved by the contraction of the internal intercostal muscles and the abdominal wall muscles, such as rectus abdominis, transverse abdominis, and oblique muscles.